strategist here at the New York Stock Exchange, one of my favorite personal guests to kick off the broadcast with. Tuckman and I were just, of course, dude, but I mean it. Tuckman and I were just, I was stunned. I had to come check with you to confirm my numbers were correct. It doesn't feel as if this is the 7th day of gains for the Nasdaq and for the S&P 500. It feels, the sentiment feels much more sour than that. What are you seeing as you look up at yet another day of green?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When you brought it up as well, I was like, no, it can't be right, but yes, it is.
Yeah.
I think that just the geopolitical headlines are just so negative, and just, war and, casualties and that's just, it's never anything good to read. So you just always feel that things are worse than they are probably. But yeah, you kind of saw things kind of shift last week. And maybe that, hopefully there was a relief rally. There was some thoughts that we're going to get closer to a ceasefire versus an increase in the hostilities, or at least the market was hoping that that was how it was going to turn out as we approached Trump's deadline. We got the turnaround before, over the weekend, or before the deadline on Tuesday. That's what the markets really wanted. That's why we had that big pop yesterday. And so it just followed the price action, right? The markets have been telling you they want peace, or they want an end to hostilities, and they want the straight open. And so that's exactly the price action we're seeing.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of earnings going on right now. We're in that kind of weird
Not
soft
yet.
spot between, I know, and remarkably, we're right around the corner from another big earnings season. That puts the emphasis on economic data. We did get a bit of an old, dated PCE print tomorrow, but today rather. But tomorrow we get a big one for CPI, really our first gauge on pricing pressure since the conflict in Iran first broke out at the end of February. What are you going to be looking for, and your sense on what investors will be looking for as we get that print tomorrow morning?
Yeah, so I think that CPI definitely the more up-to-date data tomorrow. PCE was from February. But PCE showed that we were still getting inflationary pressures coming into this probably inflationary pulse from the Iran war and oil prices. So, how the March data lines up, with the February data is going to be interesting. Goods inflation is still very high from the PCE print, right? So the tariff pull through, that's still occurring. So we're going to have to see, does that change in the CPI data with tomorrow, with the March in there, with the March data in there. Does housing still come down? The housing pricing that has been ticking down, does that continue to come down? Because that's been a disinflationary effect on inflation. So just how these headwinds or how these crosswinds are kind of interacting with each other. Are we getting any closer to the Fed's 2% inflation target? Because we haven't come close to it yet.
Yeah, of course. We'll hear what Jerome Powell has to say for what's expected to be his final press conference at the end of April. While I have you, less than a minute left, look at these software names.
Yeah.
Snowflake down 11% on the day. These names have gotten throttled. Cloudflare down another 9%. Further AI disruption?
Yeah, it's the return of SaaSpocalypse. We had a lot of updates from some of the big AI vendors, the big model vendors, Anthropic especially. We also had just Amazon come in with their own solid, very, very rosy takeaways on their shareholder letter, their annual shareholder letter. So the AI trade is happening still. Semis ripped today, trounced software, as we said, and so with maybe the geopolitical tensions kind of somewhat moving into the background, maybe sort of, that kind of trade, that long hardware, short semis, that kind of trade is kind of popping up again, and so it's going to be tough to swim against that narrative. Maybe earnings could turn the tide for the software names. We're going to have to see.
Yeah, we'll get a couple weeks out before we get those names. Eric Criscuolo, thanks for joining us and kicking off the broadcast. Nice to have you here as always.
Always a pleasure, man.